Several people commanded others to bow down, standing near a statue whose eyes were covered and whose palms were pressed together. They repeated their orders, demanding that the others bow before the emperor. Similar statues stood in 2 rows at the ends of the stairs leading to the distant castle. The people continued to issue commands, urging gratitude to heaven for the grace that had descended upon the earth. Not far from the castle lay a city, and the orders to bow persisted. The city itself was quiet, yet the voices giving orders carried on, offering to collect every word of reverence and thanks. Suddenly, the atmosphere around the statues changed. A knight, raising the hand that gripped his axe, repeated the command to bow before the emperor, preparing to strike his opponent. But his weapon began to crack, breaking into 2 pieces, and the knight himself was struck down, thrown aside with blood splashing from the wound he had received. His weapon lay in ruins, the upper half of his body torn from his legs. Yet the other knights, ignoring his death, leveled their spears and charged forward, their eyes fixed straight ahead. This force was an organization under the emperor's control, known as the Special Purpose Regiment, more commonly called the Special Squad. Yan stood before the charging knights, weapon in hand, waiting for them to approach. When they drew near, he swung his sword several times, decapitating several foes. He reminded himself that this squad existed for one reason. Before fully considering that reason, he felled more enemies, inflicting fatal wounds that sent blood spraying into the air. Then the thought returned these soldiers had been created to protect Emperor Leon Cabalan. Yet, in his mind, this explanation was wrong. He continued to fight, the statues around him now nearly soaked in blood, the asphalt beneath stained with dark splashes. The fallen knights lay motionless, and Yan, his own clothes stained, paused amid the chaos he had caused. Speaking aloud, he dismissed the reason for the squad's existence as complete nonsense. His expression hardened, and he vowed to kill Leon with his own hands. Yan had once been a captain of a special squad, but before he could advance to keep his promise, one of the dead knights began to crawl forward. It repeated that Yan must be killed and ordered him to bow. The other knights began to move as well, chanting the same words, invoking the emperor's name. They crawled toward one another, and then toward Yan. Hearing this, he turned his attention to them. The knights gathered together, merging into a single monstrous being while repeating their chants of murder and worship. Observing the massive silhouette that formed, Yan noted that even in death, these warriors remained the emperor's puppets. The fused creature shouted for Yan to bow before the emperor, then rushed forward, brandishing the weapon it still held and seeking to destroy him. Yan refused to yield. Adjusting his grip on his sword, he took a fighting stance and struck with a powerful blow. The area around the castle was now engulfed in flames. Inside the building, no one remained except in one room, where Fairy turned her head toward the noise outside. She extended her palms toward Leon's raised hand, asking if he was not surprised by the commotion. Leon told Fairy not to worry, declaring it nothing of importance. Then, suddenly turning his head toward another object, he admitted in disbelief what he saw. His gaze fell upon Yan, who had entered the room. Remembering Yan's unmatched loyalty, Leon regarded him more intently than anyone else. He called him a traitor and repeated his title, declaring that he was the captain of Yang's special squad. The protagonist did not reply, only lowering his head threateningly and frowning as he walked forward, ignoring the fact that his clothes were stained with blood. One of his hands was missing, and a splinter protruded from his leg. Finally, stopping in front of the throne, he called out to Leon. Leon, in turn, asked how long Yang had been a captain, recalling the days when he was merely a cadet. He remarked that the Abyss of Loneliness was the training center for Special Forces warriors, and that Yang had risen from an ordinary slave warrior to a captain there, seizing his opportunity with his bare hands. In that case, Leon wondered aloud, what more could Yang possibly need? In his mind, Leon drifted back to a time when the protagonist stood among the other cadets. Yang, lowering his head, decided to voice his dissatisfaction. Reaching down, he broke off the splinter sticking out of his leg. Leon watched with mild boredom as Yang suddenly drove the remaining shard into his own ear, declaring his displeasure with the bugs Leon had been planting. When Yang pulled the shard free, both he and Leon saw a writhing creature at its tip. Frowning, Yang accused the Emperor of implanting these creatures in people's heads, asking Leon if he thought he had gained everything he wanted. Yang insisted it was nonsense and shouted that, in truth, everything was lost, even his memories. As he spoke, Leon turned his hand so the small fairy-like creature hovered above his palm, then clenched his fingers into a fist, causing the creature to freeze in fear. Yang, still frowning, began to scream in desperation, demanding to know who his family was. He admitted he did not even know who he truly was, nor what had happened to his entire life. Suddenly, Leon bit the fairy in half, shouting a spell. The next moment, something sharp tore through the protagonist's body. Yang froze in shock, frowning, realizing it was Leon's sword. Thrown with such force, it continued forward even after striking him. Wide-eyed, Yang asked when Leon had done this. Blood sprayed from the wound, but Yang remained standing. Leon rose, admitting he didn't know how Yang had detected the bug, but expressing regret that it had come to this. Frowning, he confessed that Yang had been his favorite puppet. Blood streamed from Yang's teeth and chin. Before closing his eyes, the protagonist looked at Leon one final time, thinking that everything had been in vain. Suddenly, a voice called out, urging him to wake up. As Yang's eyes began to open, he saw a vague silhouette before him. The figure ordered him to get up. Yang's eyes widened, then he lowered his head, wondering what had happened. His heart had been pierced, yet it still beat, and he could not understand how this was possible. He resolved to compose himself. Looking around, he found the surroundings strangely familiar, though he could not quite place where he was. As he explored, he placed his palm against a massive pillar, unsure what it was. Then, memory began to return. His eyes widened, and he shouted in realization it was a great stone. Raising his head, Sword noticed that the pillar before him was indeed shaped like a sword. He recognized it instantly, the legendary structure that symbolized the Special Forces Warrior Training Center. Countless students had lost their lives before this monument. He told himself to stop thinking about it, then looked down at his palms, wondering if he had truly become younger. The cadet uniform he wore only deepened his suspicion had he gone back in time. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a voice complained about the noise in the area. A moment later, Roman appeared behind him, fist raised to strike. Yang sensed the attack just in time, frowning as he turned. Unable to fully evade, he braced himself by holding his hands forward to lessen the impact. Roman's blow struck hard, sending him crashing into the pillar. "Don't look away," Roman ordered. The protagonist clenched his jaw, glaring back. Roman, cadet number 12, tightened his fist, remarking that arrogance didn't make Yang special. He taunted him, asking if he truly believed victory would come so easily. Magical energy began to gather around Roman's hand, ready to amplify his next strike. Ian recalled his opponent's name, Roman. Roman observed him with mild confusion as Ian dropped to one knee, steadying himself with one hand on the ground. Roman declared that Yang was nothing remarkable. Rising to his feet, Yang asked if this was just a warm-up. Crossing his arms, Roman admitted he simply wanted to deal with a loser under the pretense of training, adding coldly that no one cared when a low-ranking cadet died. The protagonist refused to believe that. When he had first opened his eyes and seen the great stone sword, he knew his body had reverted to its younger form. Roman's words and the situation confirmed it. He had returned to the past. His jaw tightened, eyes closing as he vowed to himself that this time he would not repeat his past mistakes. He pictured his bloodied palm gripping Leon's hair and swore that this time he would slit his throat. Shaking off his thoughts, he decided to tell Roman something important. "Even at 40, he warned, "you won't have a girlfriend. You'll abandon relationships entirely and devote yourself to the military." Roman froze in shock, then his expression darkened. "What did you just say?" he growled, clenching his fist before swinging at Ian. Ian dodged easily, surprised at how slow the attack had been. It struck him how pitifully weak he currently was. Roman's anger flared further. He spat insults before launching the seventh attack of the Dark Spirit, a strike driven by outrageous rage. His movements quickened, his blows grew heavier, but Ian evaded them all, silently acknowledging that the technique was decent. In a sudden burst, Ian closed the distance between them. "Want some advice?" he asked, freezing Roman in confusion. "Attack after you've closed the gap." Placing 2 fingers against Roman's stomach, Ian clenched his fist sharply, delivering a devastating strike at point-blank range. "Like this," he added. He, too, used the 7th attack of the Dark Spirit, but from a mere 3 centimeters away. The force of the blow sent Roman flying. Stunned, he demanded to know how Ian could use such an advanced technique. Ignoring him, Ian narrowed his eyes, sprinted forward, and shouted, and after that hit them again, immediately. However, he suddenly froze, distracted by a small pendant that slipped from the pocket of his cloak. He stared at it in confusion as it bounced slightly across the ground. His surprise deepened when he realized what it was, a pendant. He wondered aloud if it had truly been with him all this time. Roman lay unconscious nearby, but he no longer spared him a glance. Instead, he bent down, picked up the pendant, and declared the day over, remarking that Roman was lucky. Examining the trinket in his hand more closely, he opened it and noticed something inside. Peering beneath the lid, his eyes widened. Within was an old photograph of a man, a woman, and a child. Unable to hold back, he began to cry. A few tears fell onto the pendant's surface as Ian felt an undeniable recognition of the people in the image, despite never having seen their faces before. This was his family. Tears streamed down his cheeks as memories of love and belonging rose unbidden, along with words he had forgotten 30 years ago. All of this, the warmth, the bond he had never attained, even after burning the imperial capital to the ground. His thoughts drifted to the night the castle was engulfed in flames, and to the bodies of the knights he had slain. Yet, even after defeating every one of them, this was something he had never gained. Snapping back from his thoughts, he shut the pendant's lid with a sharp motion and looked down at it in his hand. Lowering his head, he closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, gazing forward with renewed seriousness. He realized he had almost made the same mistake once more. Enough. He would not waste his entire life on meaningless revenge. He needed to get out no matter what. Clutching the pendant tightly, he promised himself that he would return to his family and reclaim the life he had lost. A short while later, his mind turned to the Special Forces Regiment under the Emperor's command, the very squad that had besieged the fortress of Verna. He pictured their banner, the city swallowed by flames, and recalled how they had also slain the Archduke of the North. The image of the Archduke's lifeless body, head resting on a table, flashed before him. The special squad had executed countless missions that shaped the course of the Empire's history. Back then, it had been Ian who led them. He remembered himself standing with both palms pressed to the hilt of a sword driven into the earth before him, glaring at the enemies ahead with unshakable resolve. He had been captain of the special squad, the Emperor's right hand, and the greatest knight in the Empire. Now, that same man, the former captain, gritted his teeth and frowned as he walked forward, sweat trickling down his face. With clear distaste, he muttered about how such a powerful warrior had been reduced to doing degrading work. Straining, he hefted several barrels marked with warning signs indicating they contained biological waste. The thought that this was now his job as an assistant cleaner filled him with bitterness. Yet, despite his resentment, he climbed the stairs with 2 massive, heavy barrels on his back, continuing onward. As he moved, his mind conjured the clash of swords, cadets dueling fiercely. There were only 1,000 cadets in the warrior training center, and to survive, they had to kill. He imagined, in addition to the 2 fighting warriors. The other cadets, having stopped a little to the side, stood in neat rows, quietly watching the battle. On average, 3 or 4 people died here every day, only for their places to be quickly filled again by new volunteers and abducted individuals. The training center was located within a dragon's nest, deep in the northwestern part of the mountain range. Its interior formed a vast labyrinth, resembling a dungeon. In his mind, he mapped out the approximate layout: the instructor's office, the central square, the low-level cadet barracks, and various other rooms within the dungeon. He also noted that each cadet carried a number assigned based on their abilities. This number could be raised through examinations and tournaments. In this pyramid-like system, one's rank determined how they were treated. Cadets often stepped over each other in ruthless competition, yet they were also kept under strict control. In such an environment, survival was nearly impossible for those ranked 900 and above. Low-level cadets who died were easily replaced. He himself was currently number 974. After delivering barrels, he picked up a few boxes and carried them to their designated place, thinking how those at the bottom were usually given the dirtiest tasks or used as training partners for high-ranking fighters. Today, he considered himself lucky to have only been assigned menial work. He even allowed himself a faint smile, tempted to explain the reason for his small joy. But suddenly, someone bumped into him, sending the boxes tumbling to the ground. Ian called out in displeasure, scolding the person to open their eyes and watch where they were going, all while gathering the scattered boxes. As he focused on the one who had pushed him, he froze. It was Lorna Wolf, who looked at him with a hint of sadness, admitting she had been careless and asking for his forgiveness. She was accompanied by 2 comrades, all 3 top-level cadets, heirs of aristocratic families. Their training in the Special Squad Training Center was part of maintaining loyalty to the Empire, continuing their bloodlines, and preserving influence over high society. For them, the center provided the most comfortable living conditions, and unlike common cadets, they were not implanted with control devices, for they were already bound by the privileges and obligations of their noble heritage. Thinking of this, he pictured one of those parasitic devices in his mind, then reminded himself that the top cadets always ranked highest, enjoying every benefit of their position. Among them were Lorna, Cruel Dwight, and Casa Arain, who had held the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd spots in the preparatory center since their arrival. Cruel stepped forward slightly, eyeing Ian with contempt, and asked why Lorna was apologizing to Scum. Ian held back his words, though in his mind he called Cruel an idiot. Cruel went on, questioning if Ian truly believed that being cadets meant they were equals. He scoffed at the idea that someone like Ian could even speak to Lorna, then glanced at the badge on Ian's uniform. Seeing the number 974, he pointed out that Ian was at the very bottom, wondering if he even understood his place. Cruel assumed Ian had yet to learn the laws of this place. Lowering his head in irritation, Ian thought about how much he wanted to split Cruel's skull open. But instead of acting on that impulse, he simply admitted he had been rude and apologized. Cruel, unwilling to let it go, spat the toothpick he'd been chewing toward Ian's face. Ian stayed still, his lips pressed tightly together, refusing to react. Cruel smirked and asked if that was truly all Ian had to say. He clarified that only worthy people could address him like that. The rest were expected to beg for mercy, kneel, and slam their foreheads into the ground. He repeated his demand for Ian to beg, and in Ian's mind, the scene played differently. He imagined himself cutting Cruel in half, sending blood spraying through the air. He closed his eyes, telling himself to be patient, trying to ignore Cruel's wide, mocking smile as the man asked if he had ever seen a real aristocrat in person. Seeing no reaction, Cruel assumed Ian was speechless and exclaimed that it was only natural after all. He was in the presence of someone as majestic as Cruel himself. He added that a nobody would always remain a nobody. While Cruel spoke, Lorna was packing boxes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Eventually, with no response from Ian, Cruel and his companions began to leave. Before going, Cruel warned him to be more careful in the future. Lorna waved goodbye, saying she had collected all the boxes, and apologized to Ian once more. He frowned, brushing his hand across his mouth, mentally noting that the more highly they valued their own rank and the worse they treated him, the better it would be for him. A little while later, Ian picked up the boxes again and headed toward his destination. Suddenly, he stopped, sensing something that caught his interest, a raging fury seeping from the opening ahead. Someone was hiding there. At first, he thought it might be Roman, but quickly realized the energy felt different. He decided there was no point in guessing when he could simply find out. With a sigh, he adjusted the boxes in his arms and continued walking. When he reached the doorway, he saw a girl leaning against the wall. She admitted she had been waiting for him. Recognizing the voice, Ian turned to see that it was Lorna. Crossing her arms over her chest, she addressed him as Cadet 974 and studied him closely. Ian didn't respond. His mind drifted to the most dangerous criminal in the state, one the Imperial Knights themselves had never been able to capture. Known as the Blue Iron Guard, he had committed his first murder at 11. By 20, he led his own gang, destroying 23 villages and 17 guilds. His hand, capable of withstanding even orichalcum weapons, became a symbol of fear. Moments later, Lorna stepped forward, holding that very severed hand. She stated her name and declared that she had killed him. From that moment, she had become the commander of the Knights of the Imperial Palace. The Wolf Ducum family was one of the 4 noble houses ruling the northern snowy mountains. The Knights of the Duchy described Lorna as possessing the potential to become the greatest swordsman on the continent and the youngest sword master. Even as a child, she had stood before a monster, sword in hand, and destroyed it, the snow before her stained red. She was the strongest warrior ever born to the Wolf family. Breaking from his thoughts, Ian asked if Lorna had been waiting for him. She corrected him, insisting otherwise. Before she could continue, Ian silently agreed with the common sentiment: Lorna was someone best left unprovoked. She then asked him seriously what his goal was. He didn't answer, instead wondering what would happen if he crossed her path. Lorna pressed further, asking why he was hiding his power. Still without answering, Ian decided he needed to deal with her first. At last, he told her he didn't understand what she meant. Lorna explained that she had seen him fight at the Great Stone Sword. At first, she thought he was just another punching bag like the other low-level cadets, but she soon realized otherwise. From her vantage point above the arena, she had seen Ian deliver a 3-centimeter punch, a feat no one else there could perform. She questioned why someone of such low rank had abilities like that. Ian lowered his head, realizing he had made a mistake, but kept his composure and asked what a 3-centimeter punch was. Lorna smirked, claiming she must have been mistaken, and began to walk away. Ian asked if she thought he had just been lucky. Before leaving, Lorna extended her palm toward him, asking for forgiveness. Ian intended to respond with a handshake, but before their hands could touch, she suddenly swept her palm, channeling magical energy into it, and launched a strike at him. He followed the trajectory of the attack, wondering why Lorna had suddenly chosen to use such a move. He assumed she wanted to test him, and although her strike carried too much emotion, he realized there was no alternative. He didn't dodge. Instead, Lorna altered the trajectory mid-strike, her fist connecting squarely with his jaw. The force sent him flying sideways. He collapsed to the ground, curling his knees to his chest, crying out as he noted that he could easily have died. Confused and in pain, he asked what he had done wrong. Lorna stared at him in shock before lowering her head, convinced he should have blocked the blow. She apologized. He reminded her that he had told her before he had never used that move. She apologized again, insisting she hadn't meant for things to go this far. Ian realized he had made her feel guilty, deliberately playing the part of a commoner unfairly beaten. Knowing her personality, he was certain she would believe it. In the end, Lorna asked if it was true that he had been carrying supplies. Deciding she would help, she asked where they needed to be delivered. He tried to refuse, saying she didn't need to do this, but she insisted on carrying at least one box. This time, Ian didn't argue. Lorna took one of the boxes in her hands and followed him. Noting that they were both ordinary cadets, she asked him not to speak to her so formally. He declined, believing it would be inappropriate after everything that had happened. After they had walked some distance, Lorna admitted she disliked how higher-level students treated lower-level students like slaves. Ian simply acknowledged her words. Lorna then added that if she were ever to lead the duchy, she would speak out in defense of the oppressed. Ian thought to himself that she was far more talkative than he had expected. When they reached their destination, he set the boxes on the floor, remarking that thanks to her help, he had been able to carry all the cargo. Lorna agreed, then said it was time for her to go. Ian thanked her, and she turned to leave only to pause and decide to tell him something just in case. Puzzled, he listened as she asked if it was true that he had seen her attack. She observed that he had followed her hand with his eyes and said she hoped her instincts were wrong this time as well. Finally, she bid him farewell until they met again and walked away. Lowering his head, Ian frowned, thinking to himself that she was truly intelligent. He realized she would not be easy to get rid of. Looking up, he wondered if he should act against her now. In his mind, he pictured his hands around her neck and considered killing her immediately. He knew he could easily defeat the current Lorna, but doing so would make the Wolf family his enemy. Leaving the warehouse, he entered another room and decided it would be foolish to create such a dangerous rival over mere irritation. He resolved to focus on escaping first and sensed the place he was looking for was nearby. Entering a toilet stall, he remembered his time as a special squad captain, when many tried to desert yet none succeeded in escaping the training center. He pictured the bloodied corpse of one deserter. Even one who had reached the forest was still caught there. He recalled politely asking that cadet how he had managed to get so far. The cadet, despite the pain, answered politely. Yet Ian's mind drifted to the image of a body hanging from hooks, the metal biting into skin. The torture hadn't ended there. Soon nails were driven into the cadet's body. Stuttering through the agony, the cadet revealed he had used the closed-off area specifically, the fifth stall in the toilet. Behind the wall was a hidden passage. Now, standing in that very stall, Ian pressed his palm against the wall and smiled. He had found it. After breaking down the wall in the fifth booth and tossing the bricks aside, he uncovered a narrow passage. At last, he had found a way out. Whispering the words to himself, he peered into the opening and realized it was too small to crawl through. But if he moved a few stones, he could escape. A grin spread across his face as he began shifting the stones, thinking with satisfaction that he would finally be free from the damned squad. A short while later, a man walking along the corridor called out the number of Cadet 970. He responded promptly, announcing his presence. Continuing down the list, the man stated that number 971 had died, then called for number 972. That cadet answered as well. Next came number 973, who was in place. Pleased, the man called out for number 974. When no reply came, he asked why there was no answer. Realizing what might have happened, he approached the barred door where Jan was supposed to be sitting. But as the warden neared, the protagonist spoke up, stating that Cadet 974 was right there, unmoving. He leaned casually against the wall, hands behind his head, looking completely at ease. The warden ordered him to answer faster next time, then declared roll call over. He commanded everyone to lie down before extinguishing the candles. Jan, still awake, asked himself what he had learned during his time here. He answered his own question. The quieter a person moves, the farther they will get. He knew he had only one chance to escape. Even if he made it through the hole, guards would be sent after him, and countless obstacles would follow. If the plan failed, he would be in serious trouble. In his mind, he pictured a crow clamping down on his nerves with its beak, and an eye plucked from a severed head impaled on a stake. He told himself that he would become nothing more than an example to the other cadets if caught. He decided he needed a map to create a precise escape plan. Suddenly, a bright light filled the dungeon. He thought that perhaps nothing would succeed with such a weakened body, but he had no choice. Settling into a comfortable position and closing his eyes, he focused. Energy began to stir around him. He recalled that the Dark Dragon's breath was a mana control technique known only to the commander of a special squad. Although he had managed to learn it, his body was too frail to perform it properly. It required building an internal mana engine to reduce strain. There was no time to create such a thing, and he realized he might never master the technique. With nothing else left to try, he sighed. Pressing his lips tightly together, he began to use the Divine Dragon's breath. Magical energy surged around him, and the flow of mana quickened faster than he had anticipated. Every inch of his skin seemed to drain away energy, as though a dragon itself had entered his body. He remembered that the Divine Dragon's breath was the secret technique of the first emperor, the empire's founder who had conquered many nations with a single sword. In his mind, he pictured the emperor and recalled that the technique had been created out of the ruler's boredom. The name alone was a reflection of its immense power. But suddenly, he was distracted. Feeling mana leak from his core, he told himself this could not be allowed. He clenched his jaw, uncertain how to stop it. Without warning, a scream tore from his throat. Veins stood out along his skin as he gasped for breath. Moments later, the magical light faded. Lowering his head in defeat, Yang muttered that it had not worked. He cursed under his breath, clutching his hair in frustration. It seemed impossible to create such a concentration of energy with a secret technique, especially in his current condition. He recalled that Lion had once given him a training scroll. He never knew whether it had been a test or simply the ruler's passing act of generosity, but he had accepted it nonetheless. Now he remembered, the scroll contained only instructions on how to draw mana in, but nothing about how to retain it within himself. He knew where the other scrolls were, but for now, his priority was to escape before anything began. He frowned in concentration. The next day, one of the cadets admitted he had overheard that everyone gathered here today would be sent outside. The other cadets, bewildered, asked if it was really true. Someone confirmed they had heard the same. Listening to these conversations, the protagonist noted with displeasure that they were merely dreaming. He knew such a thing would not happen. The cadets standing nearest to him asked if they would truly be able to return. Meanwhile, Ian noted that if his memory was correct, the person he was thinking of would arrive today. He resolved to avoid attracting attention. Roman, walking along the rows of cadets, suddenly called out to Ian, asking why he was hiding his face under the hood. The protagonist sighed, thinking Roman had already grown tiresome. Suddenly, an instructor appeared on the platform before the cadets. Noticing him, they asked if it was true they would be sent home today. Damon pressed his lips tightly, then called out the cadets' names, ordering them to be silent. All of them shuddered, their eyes widening as they covered their ears. Ian bowed his head, recognizing this as a voice control technique. He could not understand why Damien was using forbidden techniques on cadets. Clenching his jaw, he recalled that such a technique worked by concentrating mana in the vocal cords. For those unprepared, merely hearing it could inflict fatal injury. One cadet, trembling, coughed, feeling a disturbing pain in his chest. Blood began to stream from his eyes and nose. Damon ignored the reaction to his shout and declared that the cadet's abilities and status were irrelevant. The protagonist frowned, admitting to himself that he never expected to see this madman again. Damon, looking at the cadets with disdain, asked if they had any reason to live. He was the chief instructor of the Special Forces Training Center. Without waiting for an answer, Damon again ordered silence. While he shouted at the others, one of his assistants began pulling aside those who had fallen ill. Damon commanded the rest to immediately form ranks, calling them names, ordering them to disperse, and reminding them that the instructor was watching. Ian frowned, realizing he would need to be far more careful. Low-level cadets were nothing but toys to Damien. Damien, meanwhile, stood there smiling, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The protagonist noted that if Damien noticed him, he could forget not only about escape, but about survival itself. Finally, when the group had quieted, Damon greeted them warmly, though his words were laced with venom. He told the assembled cadets they were all incompetent, low-class nobodies. He openly admitted he would gladly kill them all, but, with a kind smile, reassured them not to worry, declaring that their blessed emperor had done all this for people like them, and had given them one final chance. Ian, frowning, listened as Damon shouted that Leon had granted them the opportunity to be chosen for the Dragon Warrior project. A thorough selection would be conducted, and the best cadets would be assigned a noble mission, protecting the Overlord. In reality, however, Ian knew the truth. A device would be implanted in the cadets' heads, brainwashing them into becoming the Emperor's puppets incapable of even dying without an order. He recalled the monstrosity made of half-dead knights that had once attacked him. Returning to the present, he saw Damon, smiling even wider, arms outstretched in praise of the Emperor's brilliance and kindness. He ordered the cadets to thank their ruler for his endless generosity. As the rows of cadets bowed their heads in submission and began to clap, Damien remarked that at least they clapped better than the high-ranking cadets. The protagonist, clapping along to avoid drawing attention, reminded himself to remain inconspicuous. Suddenly, someone addressed Damon, saying they had a question. Hearing a voice behind him, Ian turned, wondering who it was. It was Roman. The protagonist was startled to recognize him. Roman, frowning, asked whether the Dragon Warrior was truly that important, and began to question what would happen if one of them were chosen for such a lofty purpose. But he stopped for a moment without finishing, and Ian asked himself what this fool was trying to say. Roman suddenly grew angry, clenching his jaw, and demanded to know if he still had the right to strike each new recruit in the face. In that instant, a brilliant flash of magical energy appeared in the air. The beam passed through Roman's body, piercing his chest. From the wound, blood burst outward in a fine spray. Ian's eyes flew wide in shock, his legs buckling beneath him. Struggling to steady himself, he clenched his jaw as he realized Roman had been shot. Ian's focus locked on the droplets of blood suspended in the air, while Damien, arm outstretched before him, asked if Roman was all right. Squinting, Damien remarked with disdain that his head was crowded with too many obsessive thoughts, and that all cadets were nothing but insects. Distracted by these words, a few of the cadets standing closest to the fallen Roman looked at him with pity, whispering to one another had he really died. The protagonist, without stepping closer, merely turned his head so he could see Roman clearly, thinking to himself that if the bleeding were stopped, Roman might survive. But for now, it was too dangerous to intervene. Despite his injury, Roman managed to push himself upright. Scowling, he glared at Damien and demanded to know what he had just said. Pressing his palm against the wound, he stood while the cadets cried out his name, begging him to stop. Roman rose fully, ignoring them, and asked if Damien had truly called them all bugs. He could not understand why the army recruited people like them if that was the case. He spoke of how, to survive on the streets, he had endured humiliation and done dirty work, yet he had continued living because he had a reason to. He recalled the moment soldiers had taken him away before he became a cadet, glancing back to see a young boy and girl huddled together, watching him leave with sorrowful eyes. Pulled briefly from his memories, Roman asked if the Emperor and the Dragon Warriors were truly that important. Yang listened in silence, lips pressed together, while Roman's frown deepened at the thought of Damien's earlier claim that they must protect their beloved lord. Damien closed his eyes and remarked that Roman was a persistent insect like a cockroach. He recalled hearing that cockroaches could survive even after being decapitated and decided to test if that was true. Roman stood frozen, watching as Damien extended a finger, a cloud of magical energy forming at its tip. Even aware of what might come, Roman did not move. Ian's mind wandered briefly. He thought of the crystal mole, a wild rodent living deep in the mountains, known not for its appearance, but for something unusual that happened when its crystal-like body was struck. A crystal mole suddenly appeared in the air near the cadets, who gasped in surprise, asking what nonsense this was. Ian continued thinking, noting that the mole's name came from the strange reaction its crystalline part produced when hit. The cadets, recognizing it, began urging one another to run. Roman, jaws clenched, stared in disbelief as the mole positioned itself between him and the incoming magical attack. Ian watched as the mole exploded in a blinding flash the moment the attack struck its crystalline body. Damien, observing, calmly wondered aloud if this truly was a crystal mole. No one knew where it had come from. Roman, head still intact, froze in place, eyes wide, before collapsing again. The cadets rushed toward him, shouting for someone to pick him up. Ian, standing slightly apart, thought regretfully that it was a shame to sacrifice the mole. He had found it in the restroom and decided to keep it for emergencies, never imagining he would use it like this. He then glanced at Damien's calm expression. The protagonist believed the problem lay with him, quietly asking himself if it was true. He was certain he noticed everything. He understood that if anyone noticed him, it would mean the end. Suddenly, Damon cleared his throat, turned around, and remarked that Roman was as stubborn as a cockroach, adding that he actually liked it. He shouted that everyone was free. Ian, lowering his head, quietly wondered if he was truly lucky, watching Roman being escorted away by several cadets. The protagonist called Roman an idiot for being overly self-confident. Sometime later, in a dark dungeon reached by a spiral staircase, Damien walked along a corridor lined with barred doors. He sighed contentedly, then grinned, eyes narrowing slightly, noting that he had found a funny toy, replaying in his mind the images of Roman and Ian. Later still, in zone number 3, inside an abandoned toilet stall, Ian was digging a tunnel. He quietly admitted to himself that he had been careless. 3 days had already passed, and he couldn't believe he had forgotten to bring a mask. For 3 days, he had been working on an escape route, speaking softly to himself as he described his process digging the tunnel, reinforcing it with boards, and repeating the cycle. The 3rd day of work progressed smoothly. Concentrating mana into his eyes, the darkness inside the tunnel posed no obstacle. He continued removing earth with a dagger. No one had entered the abandoned room for 3 days, and it wasn't even marked on maps anymore. At this rate, he realized he might finish earlier than planned. Then suddenly, his dagger struck something. Something began pushing forward from the hole, and Ian froze in shock, jaw tightening as he realized what it might be. An instructor began roll call, checking the cadets by their assigned numbers. Numbers 830, 892, and 920 were all present. As the cadets marched past, the instructor urged them to move faster. The next to be checked was number 974. Approaching, the instructor confirmed he was present, but then asked him to stop, noticing his suspicious smile. The instructor suspected Ian was hiding something and ordered him to remove his hood. The protagonist, gripping the edges of the fabric, explained that he had accidentally broken the container he was carrying and that its contents were garbage. When he removed his hood, it became clear that parts of his face and hair were stained with foul waste. The instructor recoiled, exclaiming that Ian reeked so badly it felt like his nose might fall off. Following orders, Ian removed his clothing and cleaned it. Once it was washed, he hoped it would be enough to eliminate the stench. Relieved that no suspicion remained, he thought back to the moment he had broken through a sewer pipe. What had burst from it looked like a dragon, and he couldn't help but wonder what others here were eating for him to face such horror. Eventually, he calmed himself, noting that nothing should now interfere with his plan. He had gathered daggers, ropes, and other useful items for his escape, and his body's physical conditioning was nearly complete. To be honest, he feared dying from overstraining his muscles, but the results were clear. Ian began considering his next steps, but his thoughts were interrupted by voices nearby. One instructor, speaking to another around the corner, asked if he had heard the latest story. A man named Gale had his tongue cut out for laughing at an instructor. His comrade admitted he was so terrified he had to catch his breath. The first instructor replied that the important thing was to hold on, insisting these were probably just rumors, especially since the instructor in question was expected to leave soon. The protagonist wondered if Damon was truly leaving. A smile formed on his face as he dressed again, realizing this meant Damon would no longer be there. Glad that he knew about it, Ian began to move away. He realized he could not pass up such an opportunity and approached the abandoned toilet, deciding that before returning, he needed to erase all traces of his presence. Suddenly, he stopped, hearing footsteps, and shuddered slightly. He asked himself who could possibly be coming here. He could not determine who it might be, assuming it could be Lorna or Damon. Could they really know about his escape? But then, his expression shifted as he spotted Roman in front of him. Is it really him? Ian thought. Roman, clearly displeased, asked, "What's wrong?" Ian warned there was no time for confrontations if Roman was following him. But Roman retorted that he was here for work. Ian did not understand what he meant when he mentioned surveillance and asked if Roman was even allowed to move around. Roman, with irritation, asked who Ian thought he was. Ian noted that Roman's scratches had healed in a day like those of a dog. Looking closer, Ian suspiciously noticed blood seeping from Roman's chest bandage, the fabric soaked and stained despite the wrappings. Roman insisted it was nothing more than a pimple, claiming he had just squeezed it. Passing by him, Ian agreed, remarking that it was fine if that was all it was. Saying he had much work to do, Ian proceeded toward the abandoned toilet. Roman suddenly grinned and asked if Ian was really talking about work. He pressed further, asking if Ian had been ordered to dig a tunnel. Ian froze at the question. Roman then asked how he thought the instructor would react if he learned of this. Ian frowned, his gaze fixed on Roman. Roman noticed his apprehension. The next moment, a beam of magical energy flared in the air, and Ian instantly appeared next to him, knife in hand, invoking the 16th Dark Spirit. Roman, stunned, could not react. Ian activated hidden falconry, slashing him with the blade. Blood sprayed into the air, and Roman, clenching his jaw, shouted Ian's name. Still not fully registering what had happened, Ian stood clutching the bloodied dagger, staring ahead without emotion. Then his thoughts drifted. He imagined this scenario and realized how easily he could kill Roman. Roman's voice snapped him from his thoughts, calling his name and asking why he was silent. Opening his eyes, Ian looked at him seriously. Roman, arms crossed, asked if Ian was truly so frightened that he had lost his voice. Roman warned him that the death penalty awaited him for attempting to escape. Seeing no reaction, he continued, asking if Ian had truly not expected to be found out. He suggested that Ian should be begging him to keep quiet, hinting that he might be persuaded to do so. But Ian calmly asked why he would agree to that, certain that Roman would not tell anyone anyway. Roman demanded to know if Ian truly believed that. He declared he would go report it immediately, but Ian interrupted, stating firmly that Roman would not. He reminded him that Roman hated the special squad even more than he did. Roman froze. Ian recalled that even when faced with death, Roman could not hide his rage. He added that he knew Roman longed to return home. Ian asked if he truly wanted to report him, doubting the claim. He knew Roman's real desire was to escape. Looking him directly in the eyes, Ian asked if he was wrong. Roman admitted Ian was not so simple. He remembered their fight, recalling a moment when Ian dodged his attack and countered. Roman realized that if Ian had truly wanted, he would not be standing here now. He would be on the ground, writhing in pain from a fatal wound. Roman also knew he could recognize Ian among any of the cadets. Since SM smelled different, and hearing that Roman had distinguished him by scent, the protagonist froze in bewilderment. He asked if Roman was a stalker. Roman, startled, shouted that he didn't mean it that way. Ian, steering the conversation back to the earlier topic, asked how Roman knew he was digging a tunnel. Roman replied that it was simple. Yan had been betrayed by his own tracks. The protagonist didn't understand what footprints he was talking about, so Roman explained that most of the rooms in the center had granite floors. Yet he had noticed unusual footprints containing limestone dust. The shoe size and stride length matched Yan's perfectly. Hearing this, Yan asked if that alone was enough to figure out he intended to escape. Roman said he had also checked his work reports, noting that Yan appeared in this area far too often. Yan admitted Roman was sharper than he had expected, remarking that he couldn't tell that at first glance. Roman froze, unsure if this was a compliment or not, but eventually regained his composure and asked Yan to tell him about the plan specifically, where he was digging the tunnel. He wondered what the chances of success were. The protagonist asked if Roman wanted to know because he planned to join. Roman didn't answer immediately, needing time to think. Ian told him to stay, saying he had enough skill to earn a higher ranking in 10 years. But before leaving, Ian looked at him seriously and asked what would happen to those he was trying to protect. If Roman wasn't certain they were alive now, what would happen to them in 10 years? Ian showed him a photograph of a boy and girl, the image slowly decaying and fading into darkness. Frowning more deeply, he repeated that there was no time to think, ordering Roman to decide now. If he joined, they would no longer be here the day after tomorrow. Roman hoped Ian had considered every step. Ian confirmed he had, asking if Roman wanted to hear it. He noted there was a 9-year age gap between them, so if they both escaped, the instructors would target him first. As Ian had said, the day after tomorrow Roman wouldn't be here because he would be lying in a grave. He pictured his own body riddled with arrows. Ian, smiling faintly, admitted he was surprised Roman had thought about the consequences. It was unexpected, given Roman didn't usually seem like a reasonable person. Roman, frozen in shock again, asked if that was a compliment. Ian ordered him not to complain, reminding him he was risking just as much, and asked for his decision. Roman imagined a fishing float dipping under the water. Closing his eyes, he thought for a moment, then looked at Ian with resolve, saying there was one more thing to do. Ian imagined the float being pulled under by a fish. Later that night, everyone gathered. Damien, smiling faintly, closed his eyes and asked if the cool night air wasn't a pleasure to breathe. He announced that the cadets had been summoned at such a late hour to hear important news. The cadets listened closely. Among them stood the highest-ranking cadet, number 32, Kais. Damien admitted he usually avoided seeing cadets at this time, but the news was too good to delay. Low-ranking cadet number 525, Marvin, frowned in concentration as he listened. Ian pressed his lips together, thinking that if he was correct, tonight would be Damien's announcement of the exam. Indeed, Damien revealed that the date for the first cadet exam had been set. The rules were simple. All cadets would be sent to a single location, and if they survived there for a week, they would pass. He was about to announce the location when Ian fixed his gaze on him. Damien opened his eyes, smiling more broadly, and declared the site, the BL mountain range. The protagonist's expression hardened, the corners of his lips falling. Of course, it was the Blade Mountain Range. He remembered that many years ago, a traveler named Nil had once discovered herbs there that could cure his mother's grave illness. Nil had grown up in the Blade Mountains. He once told his mother not to worry, promising her that he would one day find the medicine they needed. Later, when a massive monster was devouring him, he lay dying, stammering and repeating the very words he had once spoken to her. The protagonist remembered that moment vividly. Some said that Nil's mother waited for her son every day until the day she died. Of all the hardships, the only small mercy was that she never learned how he had met his end. Thinking of this, Ian imagined the monster clutching a severed hand in one of its paws while chewing the remains of another victim in its bloody mouth. The Blade Mountains were infested with countless dangerous creatures, earning them the name Forbidden Zone. The most harmless monsters there were goblins, but the deeper one ventured, the more vicious and bloodthirsty the beasts became. Ian imagined the creature that had killed Nil being slain by an even larger predator, one that crushed the smaller monster's head in its jaws. The mountains were home to colossal beasts unlike anything found elsewhere, and some were so enormous that legends were told about them. One such creature was far bigger than the monster that had devoured the bird of prey, and it easily dispatched the massive goblin. There were also creatures unknown to the wider world, and some yet to be discovered. In the most remote part of the range, an especially terrifying presence lurked. Picturing this, Ian imagined a shadowy figure with glowing, malevolent eyes until his thoughts were interrupted by Damien, who had closed his eyes again and asked whether it was true that the cadets were already restless to begin. Damien wondered aloud how many of the bugs would survive the week and admitted he took pleasure in imagining their suffering. Suddenly, one of the instructors approached and, after apologizing, addressed Damien. Startled, Damien asked what he wanted. The instructor informed him they had received a message and that Damien was required elsewhere. Hearing this, Ian tensed and listened more intently to their exchange. Damien narrowed his eyes, frowned, and said he understood. Ian smiled faintly, then turned his back to the cadets. Damien announced that the conversation was over and dismissed the cadets.